Good morning to everyone. It's very nice to be here with you. Some of you are already my students, so I feel a little more comfortable being here. And as I'm a professor here of the Institute of Economics, my name is Mendonça. I've been working since my PhD on bank regulation on banking system as a whole, but especially with bank regulation. And in the last year, maybe, I decided to go a little further on sustainability, and even realizing how stressful and even depressing it is, but it's really a very hard, concrete reality that we have to do. So what I've been doing on this sense is trying to make some attachments between financial regulation, especially banking regulation, to a more sustainable finance. That's my whole point. That's a very, very specific idea that I'm going to defend today. Okay. I also would like, before starting, and I don't know if Lynette is here, I couldn't see her, I think she's not. This is a part of this presentation is a part of a paper that we've been writing together. It's a working process. And I've been doing that with Fernanda Feio from Federal Fluminense and Lynette, who is a PhD student of Federal Fluminense. So that's a work that I've been developing with them, and also someone who's around here all the time, is not right now, who is Norberto Martins from FRJ, in some way is part of it, as we've been working on this chapter for a book, which he's one of the editors, so he demanded it. So I'd like to share not the problems or the possible mistakes that I'm going to present here, but just to show that it's a part of collective work that we've been trying to do as a group. And a women group mainly, we've been trying to do that. And also it's a part of a project of a book that is being organized by some professors at UFRJ. I think that's that. Before going there, I'd like just to point out that this issue of climate change and other problems that our environment is facing. We hear, and I'm going to try I'm going to try to tell you a story here. Oh, I have to just a moment, sorry. I start talking, I forget that I have time for that. And it's a huge problem that must be faced. And finance plays an important role on this. I'm going to construct this idea. But it's a huge movement, and I'm going to look at a small part of it. I'm here not even knowing the centrality, for example, of the capital markets and all the movement of emission of green bonds. That's not my point. I'm not going to talk about taxing carbon. I'm going to look to a specific point that, as I have seen on my research, or we have seen in our research, is not a very, very touchy point. So the presentation is organized as this. After an introduction, we are going to our main part of the presentation, which is the discussion of regulation. Having in mind, this is my point here. we should not think about regulation of financial or mainly banking regulation just from the point of view of stability. In what we defend here is that financial or mainly banking regulation has its role in order to guarantee the finance that, in general, the economies demand. And in this specific situation where there's a huge movement, a huge effort to face what we are living now in order to keep these things going, not so far as we have now. And mainly that's a sentence that Guttmann said a lot of times in the course that he gave us the last few weeks, that we are talking about the possibility of exterminating our species. So the problem is huge. And then very, very short, all concluding remarks. I'm going to start with my conceptual background in order to make it clear for you, or clearer for you, what's the point of this. We depart from this Keynesian, mainly Minskian point of view, that in which the centrality of credit is phenomenal, and in which banks have an important role. I'm not going further on this, as Roger Studer already did on that presentation, that very, very important presentation that he gave to us 2 days ago. I think that was on. But what before going to Minsky, to this not very known passage of Minsky that he was working in early 90s, I'd like just to make from where I came to this point. When we read something about financial or banking regulation, it's all the time attached to the idea of stability. Mainly it was like that since ever, but especially after the Basel Accords. And the Basel Accords put into the table a type of regulation which links capital, the relation asset capital, having in mind the risk of the position. But whatever may be very, very low comfortable or less comfortable, looking at this type of regulation, and gets to strengthen the role of central banks and regulatory agencies after the financial crisis, is the idea that if you keep the institutions safe, if they are able to manage their risks and have capital to face adverse situations, they will do their job, which is, as we depart from this main conceptual view, they don't. The banks have an important part on the movement of the financing, the economy, the way the economy moves. And then when you take the regulation that comes from this point, if they are safe, if they have well-managed risks, they will take their part. And that's not necessarily happening. So I've been defending, and what I have in mind for that, obviously, is the experience that I know better, that's the Brazilian system, in which there has been a combination of prudential regulation from the early 90s based on Basel, but also many mechanisms and instruments in order to stimulate the finance or the financing for some sectors understood as more problematic and important to the economic movement. we would say, long-term financing, which has been done for decades, mainly by the BNDES. The financing of housing, mainly to poor people, who is backed by FGS and also by this other system, saving and loans system. But there are some rules in order to stimulate it. That sometimes work really, really well when the market is going on, but there are moments when it has to, the system or the regulatory system has to put some force, and that happens. As all you know, at least all the Brazilian knows, this system is being disorganized. Not just a change of strategies as we have seen in history, but this sometimes I have in my mind the idea that it's melting away. And we can see how BNDES is being working and so on. But that's not my point. My point is that what I defend here is that a country, and now we have to think broader than that, having in mind the efforts that we have to face. Regulation should be attached to stability. Financial stability is quite important. You have to have a system working, but also regulation in order to stimulate, to induce, and sometimes force financial institutions, mainly private financial institutions, to make their job when you think about not just the job of as capitalist institutions may have to make more money, just not that, just managing the risk, but they have a systemic risk, a systemic role when you think about the function of the economy. So that's what I had in mind. And I was supported by these ideas that were developed by Minsky on the end of his life. As I heard, he was writing a book on that. Unfortunately, he died during this process. And so the idea, this metaphor about the banking role, and in my view, the regulation framework, the regulatory framework is that the financial system should serve two masters. Okay? And to this two masters should be financing the development of the economies, and he creates this concept of capital development, which is financing investment, but investments which are important to the system, and more than that, investments that could be paid in order not to create a huge financial fragility. That's a point of his ideas. And also a system that would support the existence of a secure payment system. And in my view, we could enlarge this to the idea of stability. So you should have a system which, at the same time, finances the capital development and also works in order to organize a payment system that works. And then we can think about regulation in this sense, that the regulatory framework over the system should have these two movements, these two ideas behind. And what we see is that sometimes these two functions can be conflict. They can lead a conflict. Okay? So in Kregel's work, regulation plays a central role since it determines whether the system will support or limit itself to the capital development. Okay, that's one of our parts. And I think we can use this idea in order to go to this huge problem that we as human beings are facing and are going to face with more and more strength in the next years. That's how to face the effects of climate change. So that's the idea of the paper, of the part of the paper, and I'm starting with that, and I'm going to end with that. Okay. So regulation, how regulation can react, how can it manage, how can it face all the problems that the climate change effects can lead to the financial system. It's true that, and it's really working, this work is on the table, it's really happening. A reactive role, which implies the incorporation should be all these models of understanding and evaluating the risks, to introduce, to incorporate the climate change related risks. We are going to talk about mainly transition and fiscal risks. So that's the big effort that has been done to take into the system this regulatory framework, which has this mothership, which is Basel, which links risks and capital ratios, but also that's what I'm proposing here, and been seen in some of papers of the literature, an active role, which is the stimulation, not only the stimulation, but also the induction of mechanisms to finance sustainable positions, mainly investments, which can contribute to the mitigation of the effects of climate change. And also the stimulation of the transition process towards a very low carbon economy, even a zero net carbon economy. That's our department, that's our point. And that's a point that's, this idea wasn't very sure where I should put it. That's a problem, we have a problem there. Because the decisions of financial institutions have in mind the risks can contribute to increasing or decreasing the climate-related risks. If these financial institutions are financing, for example, green positions or brown positions. So they have this role that they can affect. But not necessarily they suffer the losses or gains from these decisions. You see, that's an important part. So the way that financial institutions behave can increase or mitigate the damage. But it's not related to its main motor, which is, as any capitalist institution, to make more money through the process. We've been discussing, I think that Harry said that, and another speaker said also this movement, money to money, okay? But also the climate change risks can affect the stability. Okay, so we have this paradox. I think I'm not going to that. I think that you are aware of, we have already heard it from students, but you are aware of the moment that we are living, okay? But what we have now, just a thing to, what we have now, these accumulated stocks of greenhouses, leads to, what we have already leads to important change of the climate. And all these results to how our society, how our economies work. And we are living there. We are seeing the melting of the polar ices. We are seeing the change of circulation and level of oceans. We are seeing now floods and desertification. You see fires, we have seen that on California, on Europe this year, we've heard about it in this school. And you see, after I ended my presentation today at 2 in the morning, I started to see my Instagram and to just to relax. And I saw some institution really close to UN asking for money to help people that are living on this desertification part of the northeastern Africa. And just after that, information from Le Figaro that showed a very huge rain with very huge winds in Paris and flood that was in Paris just 2 days ago. So we are living there, you see, and it will get worse. You see, these extreme events are getting worse. We need to think. We have already this stock of CO2 and CO4 into the atmosphere. We have really to do this movement to lower. And of course, that's here my link. Makes money to do that. You need finance to do that. I try to detect some amounts in order just to make it more concrete. Mark Carney, which is an important guy on this process of financing and facing and addressing the risks and the necessity to move to a low carbon system. He thinks about an amount of something like $100 trillion for the next decade. We see that something very, very, very close to this from the report of Mendonça, which defend that we need more, an additional amount of $3.5 trillion per year in the next 30 years. And what we have right now, according to the same report, is 600 billion. It's a lot, but the account doesn't come to 6. We need much more. And also we have this new information that I just found yesterday, going on almost the same movement. So it's a huge amount of money. And then it's necessary to organize everything, public and private institutions. All the governments, civil societies. And when we talk about financial system, capital markets, banking, the effort is huge and everything has to be used. And financial systems, we depart from this idea that they are not only drivers, but creators of resources that can finance investments that can bring about the structural change necessary to face the climate risks, the mitigation of these climate risks, and also all these climate effects, and also this movement to a more sustainable economy. I think that we've already gone on this, but again, my point. Regulation on this side has to be not only reactive in order to be able to include these risks related to climate, which is quite difficult, big effort to do. That's important. But also that it should have, regulation should induce the system in a more proactive, transformative way, in order to get all the resources to make this movement, to finance investments in infrastructure, in research, everything in order to guarantee, in order to face this important situation. So our point here regulatory framework should be a part of this more transformative goal. Just in order to, and I think that should be already clear for you, but it should be, there's no way out. We don't have another planet, and we should go all together. There is this important movement of international institutions like the UN that have been working on it, and having that in mind, Paris Climate Agreement is quite an important movement. I'm not going to go here through the voluntary process, through the commitment of each country has to do about their contribution. Not are going to do that. But what we see, even being voluntary, that on Paris Agreement, the idea that finance matters is there into the treaty. You can see that in the Article 2.1, making finance flow consistent with a pathway towards low greenhouse gas emissions and climate resilient development. That's there, even that voluntary. And when we talk, when it was copy 20, I should copy 16. But what we have seen now, last year copy at Glasgow, there's a lot of things that were discussed, a lot of goals that were reached, a lot of goals that were not reached and but were expected. But this, you have, there was a predominance of discussions on sustainable finance. And also important, from before that and from there was this organization of private firms in order to compromise with a huge amount of money in order to finance that. I have seen the numbers, it's almost like 450 institutions that are different financial institutions, and some are also some multilateral and other institutions that are involved to that. So we are not discussing here if it's happening, but it's a movement, awareness that something has to be done, even this movement of organizing the private financial market. You see, everything has to be put together. As I said, public and private, domestic and multilateral, banking and capital markets. I think Simone has talked a little about this public finance that we could go also. For example, we had very, very good news last week when the North American Senate has voted for this anti-inflation act, which leads to a lot of money to finance renewable energy. As I'm not sure, but I think it's almost $500 billion. That's something on this. You have to. The effort has to be huge. Lilith, I quoted you at just the beginning, showing that it's part of our work together this year. One of the authors. We haven't made it available to you because it's in Portuguese. If you want to, you can do that. We don't have an English version for that. We should, Nelly, we will. We will. And the third, Mark Carney is a very important figure on this. I think you have heard about him. He was president of the Bank of England and also Bank of Canada, and was in charge of also financial stability board. And he has so what we see that there are a huge movement of global and coordinated reactions, different levels of agents and organizations, NGOs, international institutions, so civil society organizations, financial and business institutions. And what we have seen in the last years is an important group of initiatives in the international level, being that about this network of financial, of central banks and financial supervisors for bringing the financial system, which it started with 8 central banks in 1917, and they have almost 10 central banks and regulatory agencies on this project. This task force related to financial disclosures through under the Financial Stability Board. I like a lot the work of this International Development Finance Club, this EDFC, that organizes, that puts together different development and public banks around the world. And so there's a lot of important movements into this. It seems that at this moment of Paris Accord, it was already happening, but the awareness of the signs of the problem is here, and there is this movement. The question is this enough? We still have to be huge. Because even this compromise of Paris Agreement to keep the temperature just 1.5 Celsius above the level of the pre-industrial moments, it seems that's already gone. Okay. And then, having that on the international level, what we see is that central banks and regulatory authorities are into this also. We have a lot of them related to this green financial system. We've been seeing a lot of resolutions in order to think. We are going to talk a little about this, to think risks and to think, to understand what these climate change risks are, how can we understand, how can we measure, how can we integrate it into the system, framework system based on risks. Okay. But you see, there's a struggle on that. There's a struggle. The main mandate of the main mission of the majority of the central banks is inflation, as we have listened a lot from Andrea the other day. And also, they have this mission of financial stability, or the combination of central bank and regulatory agencies. It depends on the institutional framework of the country. But we see, and then there is this struggle. There is this struggle in order to, for example, there is a movement to use this master ship, that's Basel, in order to stimulate green and destimulate brown, using, for example, factors into the calculus of the capital. But there is a reaction, even of some important central banks, as Bank of England. They say, no, the financial regulation, the banking regulation, a la Basel, should be attached to the idea of risks to stability. We cannot create situations of arbitrage, for example. And there's another group of analysts that say, when we talk about climate change, we are talking about stability. Okay, so there's this struggle between what we could call the folks of the financial stability and the others that understand the problem in a broader way. So having in mind this, I think that we have already said that facing the climate change is important. Investments, huge investments had to be done. They have to be financed. And then how to do that? And you have different answers, but all efforts have to be taken. Okay, we have already said that. Our purpose here is to have a special eye to a movement, to what we defend in a movement of using the regulatory framework, mainly on banks. We are not going to discuss capital markets. To do so. So again, we are facing huge problem. There has to be different addressing. Finance is important. We are just trying to discuss one little part of it. So how financial regulation are being? I will use another 30. Okay, Camila. At what time should I stop? We have until 10 or not? I think I can.
10. But
For the.
you can manage your time.
Yes, I will try to. You see, I can't speak. I'm always speaking like a teacher. You may see that I'm not presenting a paper. And even when I present a paper, I speak as a teacher. So sorry for that. So how what we see now, what's happening mainly happened, a huge movement to understand and to measure the elements which can lead us to introduce the climate-related risks to this framework. So, as you have already said, this risk-related, climate-related risks, they can affect resilience, stability, and extreme situations, the very function of the financial system. The very function of the financial system. In general, these three types of risks are discussed, mainly the two of us, these two. The liability risks are less in the picture, but was detected by Mark Carney on his very important speech to the issuers, the bravery issuers in London, and just before the COP that led to the Paris Agreement. And what is this? Fiscal risks are the risks of all the losses that we can take by these extreme events that are going even more harder. I have an example for you. Let me see if I can remember. It's an example from the Bank of England. There is an information that leads to 85% of all the households financing in England are guaranteed, the collateral are the property. And 75% of all the loans to small and medium enterprises also. And there's another, and the statistics show that in 2009, there was more than 50 million houses in properties in England are prone to be in a flood. And it means that 1 in each 6 houses or 6 properties. So you can see that. You can see the problem to the financial system, to the insurers, to whom has made all these loans, that it can mean. I almost have seen, I couldn't find again, it has been a long time. I think that was the time when it started to be in my mind that there was a study that showed that the raising of the sea level could lead to floods in Florida, and have in mind all the mortgages that you have there, it could mean the explosion of a financial crisis bigger than the last one. Okay, so we are there. We are just there. Okay. And the liability risks are the liability of all this going to court of people who are losing things and then manage to make process against governments or other enterprises. But the huge movement is how to incorporate these risks into this regulatory framework. I'm not going to discuss development banks, maybe at the end. So, shortly, and here I try to put all together. The potential effects of climate change are huge, and it can jeopardize the way people live and economics work. Okay, it can jeopardize. Even in a very, very extreme situation, the existence of human species, as Guttmann has really is a fighter on this movement. So, the efforts to face climate change, having in mind the mitigation of its effects, and the transition to a low or even zero carbon economy, have to be substantial. But, and these efforts have to be financed. Banks play a role into this process. And the big question is how to induce banks to do that. That's our point. So regulation may play its part. I think that we have already gone there from the concept of framework and to our. In general, when we talk about banking regulation, we talk about prudential regulation. The idea of the introduction of climate-related risks issues into the regulatory framework. We are calling it a reactive response on our data. You see, I've been, unfortunately, didn't have time to think about it. It has just been published a paper, which one of the authors is Danielle Gabor. How do I say that? Gabor. She's not British. She told me she's I don't remember. Well, they are going in the same way, and they don't use the terms reactive response and active response. They call it prudential and promotion. We are going in the same way. That's quite nice to see that lineage, but I haven't seen a lot of works on this sense. So our main point is this. We have a huge discussion and movement and efforts in this direction. And that's quite important. Because we have to have a system that works. Stability is central. As you know, the way that the system works leads to instability. We depart from mainstream. You don't need any externality, even thinking about it happens or not, as Professor Rochon has already said. So this effort is in the streets. It's going on. It's huge. It's quite difficult. If you think about measuring risks, all these frameworks are based on risks, measured risks. And it depends on the previous history. How to manage to do that? Work is being done, a lot of stress tests with a lot of problems, but they are there. You see, that's the main work, and that's less work. Why? Because it means a different way of thinking from the logic of the markets. This regulatory framework is very, 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 even if it puts some limits on it, it's based on the idea of markets banks. They are able to calculate the risks, and even depending on the system, the capital that they should keep having in mind the system. these risks. Okay, Basel III changed it a little, you have some sharp indices, but still, the logic is the logic of the market. Here is another situation. We're talking about induction, even enforcement. Okay. Not a lot of people discussing this. And also, this both, even the first one, you have a long way to go with very different peers, layers of issues to be worked. For example, there's no basic definition of what is green and sustainable activities. That seems to be supported to economic policy, regulation, and banks' position. So there's this movement of understanding the comprehension and understanding how to define, how to classify, how to share, how to measure them. It's quite different from the other way that risks were treated. And you've seen a lot on this sense. When you take this network for greening the financial system, you have a lot of work and change of experiences. Regarding the reactive response, I think that some big efforts are being made also on this. Oh, we are talking about reactive response. And the challenges are big. For example, the green swan, how to live with the idea of green swan, measuring risk and understanding risks that are quite. You see, even the banks have problems to understand this. And also the corporations that are taking, selling assets, taking, borrowing money, they also are making this effort. They should do an effort to understand the risks that they are facing. Again, they are facing. But as you see, they face, you affect the economy, and not necessarily you are, this corporation is the only or the most affected by this decision. It's a lot of new things. I was thinking for this presentation, when there was this movement from Basel I to Basel II, where the measuring of risk and even the fact of started, there was the possibility of banks doing that, you had to have a huge movement to understand new information. This is much bigger than that. And also, if someone is interested in this, Vallet works a very interesting way of digging, understanding the climate-related risks as a climate systemic risk. It shows how we can face it. And all these informations are quite important even to an active response. How can a type of stimulation to green activity? Which is the green activity? We are talking about a sector. We are talking about activity. We are talking about a project. You see, you have to have a taxonomy. The European Union is working on that. Here in Brazil, there is this effort made by the FEBRABAN, the Bank Federation, in order to create a taxonomy of what's green, of what's brown, having in mind sectors. It's not easy, but it has to be done. I like very much this Campillo et al. Is one of the. You don't have many papers that leads to this idea of what we're calling active response. And he organizes from literature. He organizes 4 kinds of moments of intervention or suggestions for interventions for central banks and regulators. First one, the development of methodology, methods, and tools for better understanding, contribution to and comparability of climate risks, as well as their effects on financial sector and the economy as a whole. I would say that's going fast. The second it is encouraging transparency in the disclosure of information related to climate risks. It's doing. Incorporation of these risks into regulatory framework depends on the two. It's a lot of work to do that. And even something that's closer to what we're saying here, the incorporation of climate risks in the formatting of instruments and economic policies still starting. Okay, still starting. I think that this type of organization helps us to think about it, to organize our heads. So having in mind this, you organize also Campinho and this Ameri, and there's another author called Running, and in another sense, this Care Alexander that I suggested you to read. If we can go into some ways of facing this, of organizing this active response. For example, factors can be applied to the capital requirements of financial institutions, or using this huge ship that sinks into the sea, into the oceans, that's Basel, in order not just to financial stability, but also in order to stimulate green and stimulate brown. As I have already said, the faults or the hopes of financial stability, that's not possible. You will need to arbitrage. Also, there's also some analysts who defend the introduction of capital buffers for loans to broad activities, going further. Targeting loans, loan credit for green activities. Targeting, you see, that's harder. Even using some called monetary policy instruments. So that is lower reserves and lower for some end here capital requirements. The same, lower capital requirements for financing operations for sustainable activity. Also, banking system reforms, easing lending conditions for green instruments, and even relaxing macro-prudential regulations related to this. Even unconventional monetary policies, such as we discussed a lot, quantitative easing aimed at the purchase of green assets. You see, monetary policy can be an important instrument, mainly when you think about reserves, but mainly when I think about how the monetary policy, the bonds that are used, you have seen that already in Europe. Again, that's not our point. And then we looked for in the literature to see which are the experiences already happening, okay, on this different type of regulation, having in mind the stimulus of the more active response, of inducing the finance of revolution. Different central banks are doing that, mainly the Asian ones, as we're going to see. We choose prudential regulation mechanisms, monetary policies, instruments. I don't like very much this term. I just link it to the reserves. And as well, the use of clear mechanisms for direct credit. We see that the Central Bank of Lebanon has differentiates the reserve requirements imposed on banks related to their bank deposits in terms of financing operational loans for renewable energy projects. So if they have loans to renewable energy projects on their assets, they will have lower requirement of reserves. And then Central Bank of Lebanon could see, that's the importance of Central Bank of Lebanon, and even the Bangladesh Bank, they are experiencing that. But we also see the People's Bank of China is starting to consider, is working on this and starting to consider this. Based on the idea that the Basel framework, that's based on risks, capital assets, having in mind their risks, analyzes some green finance projects. You see, it's much more difficult to evaluate mainly in the short term, the risks of these projects. Then, having in mind that when you have this Basel framework, you can stimulate brown instead of green. They are just encouraging the returns of green projects where were increasing and reduced the returns of brown projects. They have this, I think that I can go. What we have, I put this information. I lost it. There is an idea there. You see, you should, Basel in general would stimulate brown and stimulate green, but they decide to lower the requirements for green if there are other indicators, other ratios that show that these activities or these projects are less risky, for example, non-performing loans. So even the strategy of stimulating green using a lower capital requirement are induced by the idea of lower risk that are not captured by the models. Okay. The Reserve Bank of India has commercial banks have to allocate 40% of their loans to priority sectors, and renewable energy segment are among the sectors since 2015. The Bangladesh Bank introduced the regulation that requires financial institutions to comply with minimum credit quotas for green segments. And also, banks and financial institutions must allocate 10% of their financial institution corporate social responsibility. I imagine that they are capital to a climate risk fund, and through provisions, credit provisions, or lower interest rate operations. And also in Bangladesh, maybe commercial banks have access to preferential refinancing lines for green loans. Bank of Japan also offers loans to below market rates to banks to support lending to priority sectors. So even the Bank of Japan. The European experience. This report of this group on sustainability finance of 2018 suggests the incorporation of sustainability factors that happens on China to capital requirements, penalty factors for assets linked to brown, and support factors for green activities. But they just reject the proposal of the European Banking Federation to lower capital requirements to green or more sustainable sector. As far as I know, it's not already happening, okay, even this factors. Classification of also, they defend classifications of green and brown assets, a green taxonomy, as I have read that. Evidence of lower risk for lending and finance green assets at a macro level, so it should be necessary for this, using these lower factors. And also, if it's approved, it should have caps on lower requirements on green assets. There's a lot of critics to these supporting factors. Fear of arbitrage, like we have said about, talked about that, problematization of the capital requirement of objectives, financial stability, and possible results on linking questions. As this methodology of using the factors were already used to small and medium enterprise, I don't know this process, and were not, it didn't work well. So to end, I think I was speaking done. I thought I will end earlier. Again, Kappes said that climate change must be addressed, it involves huge effort. Banking and capital markets have their role. The question is how to involve private institutions. Are market mechanisms enough? That's quite important point for us. Financial regulation, mainly banking regulation has its parts. The regulatory framework must pursue the financial stability, but also to stimulate and discourage private financial institutions and encourage, to create instruments to direct resources to low carbon. That's it. Thank you, guys. And thank you. Can I manage them? Just my husband just brought me back and I did not realize. It was so cute. Sorry. I can manage that, I think. Do I have here André and Rochon? I haven't seen who was. See também? What's your name? Luis.
And what right here?
And Álvaro Simone. Okay. Álvaro Simone. Simone was first. Here. Diogo.
Here is someone.
So,
Gary.
Gary, yes, Gary.
So, hi, thank you very much for your class. For me, it was very important because I know almost nothing about the topic, so it's very good for me.
We have already discussed some of this work on your group.
Yeah.
This was when I was starting this.
I have small knowledge about it. And my interest, of course, is on monetary policy, and we will have been talking about it. And of course, this is not your goal here, but since we are planning to do something in the future, as I understand, there are two items that are related to monetary policy: the lower reserves, lower capital requirements, and the use of UNP for financing. Do you have any intuition about how that can impact the transmission mechanism of monetary policy? Actually, are both two questions, and they are related. The impact on inflation dynamics and also on the transmission mechanism of monetary policy. I believe those two topics should be treated in two separate papers. So, of course, you don't have an answer, right? Just a glitch or something. Thank you.
I have to think a lot of You can talk now and you can do that after, but I will think. I will try. And then.
Thanks, great presentation. Very much enjoyed it. There's, unless I didn't hear correctly, I think there's just one piece of the puzzle that's missing, which is the role of public banks. I think there's a lot, especially given that what's happening in the United States on the environment and public banks. But I think that's something that just could fit right into the story.
I think that I can go through more quickly. We worked on this paper, you see. And I have to, I don't know if you know about the Brazilian institutionality. We used to have a huge and important public financial system. So that really comes from that. We should use it more. But yes, it's a puzzle. Especially when we go to my argument here, or our argument here, that the regulation goes in a way that is stimulating in a manner, in a way quite different from the market logic. Okay? And public banks have this role. Okay? We think about the role of public banks in that sense. They should go. They have many functions, and they should go to not only. You see, that's not a vision of market failure. They just should go where private sector doesn't want to. It also can do that, but it can go to create markets. It can go to create to situations where the returns, the financial returns, are not interesting from the private sense. But they can go further than that. You see, and what we have on the international literature. The development banks are quite important on this. And even there is some, I think that we are still in a very, very macro discussion. But for example, when we think about this huge movement, if you have this $100 trillion, how to manage that to go to the system, to all the projects, and so you can use, in general, public and especially development banks. They have all these portfolio and projects. They have studies to do that. They also can have this work to canalize even these private resources to the project. So they are an important part of this. We should think about, and for example, on the money, and I already wrote about this, on the US institutionality that you don't know a lot. You don't have public, but you have the community bank. So all different forms of institutions that should go necessarily to the logic of the efficiency and the profits. But that's something, and we worry about that. And the second part of the papers goes to the public development, but mainly the public bank and their role on all this. Thank you. Luis.
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. I was going to ask you exactly about the public banks, because you said that we must have a different way of thinking from the logic of the market.
Yes.
And the private banks, they are not this, because as I see from investments on green investments from private banks like electric cars, they are not so green, because in the way I see, for example, the battery, when the battery of the cars is over, probably we are going to have to buy another car, because another battery will be so expensive. So the public banks, I believe that they have to think a way of different green investment that we are seeing today, because, for example, electric cars and even some forms of electric energy, to think about distribution and where we are going to put it, like eolic, I don't know.
I think that's eolic. I don't know.
Eolic, yes. it's a large area, and where we are going to put it and do not destroy
And the problem is the maintenance of the energy, the batteries that are needed, and the technology is
Yes.
not good, and here they are good, we have all these metals that they have.
Yes, and in this way, I believe that the public system, I can't see the private sector, the private banking system, investment banking doing this. So how can we manage it to this bank stay out of this process? Because they are not totally in, you know, I don't know if you-
Yes, I understood. Yes. I would go in the same way that you did. But what we have here, and therefore is so huge that there's a mission that's bigger than the public financing system. You have to go further, you see. And so what we are proposing here, there's a lot of people saying that if you go to, for example, to newspapers, economic newspapers as a Brazilian, you have all the time, oh, you can have a good business on that. Yes, you can do that, but it doesn't answer the question. Or, for example, the ESG, it's not enough. So what I'm proposing here is that you should have also some mechanisms to induce that. How is it going to work? You have seen in different moments when the private capital, when the private banks, the capital in banks are limited, they innovate, you see, using the arbitrage. That's a real problem. Regulation, there's a problem between regulation and the dynamics of the market. You know that the regulation is more flexible than you have all this, and I think that it can still happen, see, but that's the only way. So what I've been thinking of is just public is not enough. Even when you mix public financing with governments, with huge budget efforts, you have to have more than that. And in this sense, banks plays an important role as they are creators, at least in the system that we have now, these two-tier systems. I don't know what's going to happen with all this movement of digitalization and private monies that are not private currencies, they are just speculative assets, but we have this response from central banks. So the system is changing right now during all this process. And so I totally agree with you. I would go on this direction before, but I realized that not enough. That's one point. One other point that you have just mentioned, and I'd like just to quote Guttmann on this course. The solutions have to be more profound than just having an electric car. Oh, I'm so used to the mass that I didn't push it out. That's a problem, Marlon. So I'm so used to that. So just we should not go just for electrical car. We should go to public transportation. You see, yeah. The need is of a huge transformation, and to where we are prepared for that. And also something that comes to my mind from your question. You have to have huge investment on technology. And not only that, again, quoting Guttmann, that these results of this technological innovation should be shared. That's another point. You have a very important new technology, it's not shared, it doesn't solve part of the problem. So many efforts, and people who are more optimistic about all this process, as Guttmann, for example, thinks that we will face so many problems from now that we will have to accept and incorporate these collective solutions. I'm quite worried about that, but in general, people try to look for the individual solutions. Here in Brazil, that's fine. So that's And I think that you, as young people, are quite important on this movement. Because you are going to suffer much more than we are from this.
Good morning.
Thanks for the presentation, Rosa, and for bringing us such a, let's say, hot topic. And I haven't been able to follow that topic, so I'm learning with you. And I'd like to know, Rosa, and if you could share with us, how much have you been able to follow what our central bank, Brazilian central bank, is thinking about that? If there are policies that maybe are going back to my point, if Brazilian central bank or our president or the board of directors, if they have already pointed to act somehow in this topic of climate change and environmental, etc. Because I just following newspapers and the media in general, I haven't heard anything or have read anything until the moment, and that's right.
No, you see, the Brazilian Central Bank is quite active, and he's really, that's one point that we all have already talked about. The current Brazilian Central Bank, the head of the Brazilian Central Bank, is quite a clever guy. He's really,
Yes.
he's into all these discussions in the international level, having this climate change related risks, the CBDC, he's really, a lot of movements have been done through the central bank. So that's quite active. Even before this central bank that we have now, the Brazilian Central Bank started it on early 2010s. It's really going, but what
there is research going on.
yes, there's resolutions.
Okay.
It's a Conselho Monetário Nacional resolution, directives, but as you can see, I don't know if you follow this mainly on this market idea of understanding and how to measure and how to stimulate the financial institutions to measure it. So it's huge, but on this, the format that we have now, the Brazilian Central Bank, which is also our regulatory agency, is not on this, for example, going further on all the mechanism of earmarked credit. That's not. There's some movement to agriculture, you see, and that's a problem. That's part of the Brazilian problem. Our problem today of emissions of CO2 are mainly the problem with agriculture and deforestation. You see, as we don't have huge industry as we used to be, it's even easier to face that. Brazil could have not just keeping this world lungs, but it could stop and make a good work just stopping the deforestation.
So earmarked rural credit could help a lot.
Yes, but it's not earmarked, but there's some specific rules for credit.
Yes.
But mainly it's really ahead. But you see, understanding the risk is quite important. Stimulating banks and borrowers to understand it's quite important. But so it's happening.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, it's on your question. Thank you very much. I don't know.
No, sorry.
Don't worry. Okay, good morning. Thank you for the presentation. And I really think that
this kind of propository effort is very important. And my question, maybe it's based on my experience in Brazil and about our scenario, but I would like to say that at least in our case, in Brazilian case, private banks are very under-engaged in finance long-term, long-run investment projects, both in green and brown activities. So in this sense, I think that we have a previous problem, not only to direct the credit to green activities, but to direct credit to finance investment as a whole in our country. And on the other hand, I think that there are a lack of companies engaged in innovative activities, trying to think about how to deal with all these problems that we are discussing today and we have discussed yesterday. So I think that the direction that policy should take, I don't know if there are another option than withdraw banks with their power of decision on how to allocate their funds and credit. It must be a kind of publicly coordinated action to allocate credit in the right direction, and also to stimulate companies in the productive sector to do the same, to put efforts in the direction of the kind of investment that we need. So I think it's very good to think how we can do regulation to deal with these problems. And I think that's the right direction that we have to go. But even at least at the theoretical level, I think that there's no way different than try to make government and state stronger in the financial sector. That's my point.
It's a very good question, and I can tell you that just not I'm going to the Brazilian case, but your perception can lead to different countries' problems, because you see what we've been seeing here is. And from our point of view, we are looking from very, very small angle. Central banks and regulatory agencies have their role. But you see, there's a worry that central banks are not able to do a lot. So they have to be a part of a larger movement of coordination. But this movement shouldn't be just into the umbrella of a state. It has to be global. You see, it has to be global. I was thinking on my presentation, for example, when I was listening to all the speakers, former speakers, and for example, yesterday Ferrari, you see, I really enjoyed his joke on Ferrari. Did you like it? I don't have a joke like that, okay? And just, I cannot say about that, but global governance and sustainability issues. That's it, you have to have global governance. You see, the problem is the planet. What's happening there in the central countries affects us in a very, very hard way. So I would say that the problem is bigger. You need coordination, not just central banks, it's a part of the movement. The organization of central banks, the organization of public banks are part of it. But the effort has to be bigger. Okay, so the problem is not just the Brazilian one. I would say in the Brazilian case that we have bonus, we have more problems, but we have also more solutions. Well, as you know, the Brazilian system, which are the main funding of long-term loans in our system. Not just the public banks, but this is what we call, Simone and I have been working on, this is public financing system. It's not just the banks, the public banks, but all this funding, the long-term funding that we have in our institutionality, as FAT, as FGTS, you just quoted the other day, I saw that you quoted. when you take a long-term
Kind of
finance.
compulsory savings, yes. Like a.
Yes, I think there are mechanisms of fiscal and parafiscal or movements of compulsory. Because you have also the constitutional funds, we have the systems, but what we have seen, the problem is bigger, because what we have seen, we have been seeing a struggle of the system. Look at FGTS. When the FGTS was created, it was to finance low-income families, housing for low-income housing, not real estate housing, but also to finance long-term. It's two objects on its creation. See, what we see now, it's important, it still have, it has been used as to stimulate demand. You see, you have less formalized jobs, so the influx are lower, but you have important outflux for stimulate demand. So what has happened to BNDES, and so we have this system used to finance long term. And what we have seen in the last years, since the coup d'etat, and especially from the Bolsonaro's government and central banks, there were a movement to the capital markets. That's huge. That's huge what we see, especially in 2019. So the problem, and also you touched some very important points, is that we cannot obligate people to invest, you see. You can have resources, but they cannot invest. But what the Institute of IPCC and all of the research, they show that having in mind what's happening to Amazon, we are going to have it's going to be a savanna, and then all this production, this agricultural production that we have in the Middle East, will be not, we have heard about this, I think that's what they're talking about. So we have huge problems to think about. I totally agree that our problem is previous, but we already had a solution.
Great.
I think that I have the hope that we will be able to pick the pieces and reconstruct it.
Yes.
No, right. Just
Yes.
at the end, now it's like, there's a key.
Yes, first I was saying I was representing them.
Okay.
Who is the first?
No, correct.
Yes, first I was saying I was representing them on this issue. I'm not a big fan of regulation. So I would like to change the discussion because we're focusing on the state and state banks. I'd like to know what's the role of the private sector? Because we have institutional investors.
Well, could you please speak slowly?
Um,
Otherwise I can't understand you.
Okay, I was saying that I will change the subject because
Yes, and to public banks.
yes, to the private sectors because we also there's no private investing around the world for money they want to invest, particularly if you're charging all this green investment. So I'd like also to know what beside the regulations, what would be done, particularly in Brazil, because it's a big market, just to make sure that all these private investors, institutional investors can come to Brazil to invest for long term. Because money is there. What actually those people need is less regulations and maybe actually incentive from the government on all this side. Because when you look, for example, people are discussing about BNDES, and what's happened in the last 2 years. But it was a global movement. I believe one China has like 5 major state-owned banks, but most of the West countries, it's like the private investment by banks. And then, so I would like to also to discuss the role of private sector, because it's also mostly the government and states, but there's a role also that should be played by private sectors. Thank you.
Yes, it's true. As I've been saying from the beginning, just public, I remember talking to Luis and to Diogo, not enough, I totally agree. I won't disagree with you when you have the US experience, for example, in mind. You see, you have different institutionalities, you have different countries. So I wouldn't think that the US solutions. And right now, the private money in the US is going to a huge movement of renewable energy. Now we have just approved an enormous package to finance this with public money, you see, fiscal policy. That comes from taxes and you see that. So I wouldn't say that, but I understood that you are quite worried about the movement of the private sector. I would say that's quite important. We need the movement is huge, but what moves private sector? What moves? Money. The idea of making more money than you have today. That's the thing. That's the main lesson that Keynes give us, Marx give us. You see, and then in order to have to guarantee more money in this order, it's important. It's important. You can find profitable investments. Yes, you can. You can have another type of stimulus. But what I'm saying, that's not enough. We cannot, you see, there are many very important investments that are important, for example, historically to Brazil, to people, to the economy, but they are not interesting from the point of view of the creation of profits. But they have to be done. I think that's maybe that's a different departure from point of view. I believe that if from the beginning, I think that we have discussed that on the course. From the beginning, that if you have everyone, every corporation, every house looking for their own arm, doing the best for them, you will have a good position on system. I don't think that happens to market. So, and we want to see that's what happens. So we have to have different solutions. And again, private corporations, they are innovative, they are competitive, they can be more efficient. There's a lot of, this movement alone is not enough. Not to the efforts of facing climate change, and it wasn't before to guarantee the development of our peripheral economy. So I would say that it plays its part. It wasn't my point of view here, but a part, and it has to be induced for the. I'm not sure if I went to your point.
So no, clear.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm quite stimulated, so hopefully my question will still be clear. But I think that you're completely right to locate the financial system inside of the bigger picture of what we need. And I would propose that actually we need to define what that big picture is in order to define the role of finance. And one element that is important is the distribution. There is overproduction linked to top income and high inequality, but sustainable also means that we need to provide for basic needs for the population. So then redistribution becomes important because it both allows us to focus on global public goods, like Guttmann said, or just provisioning in general, also the term used by Gary and others. But also producing less, as a result that there will be a certain decrease in spurious consumption that leads to quite high emissions and high carbon lifestyles. So if we contextualize into that discussion, then I think we can think of the role of finance even further. And I had so my question is basically, then I think we all kind of agreed in the discussion that there is a role maybe for public finance, maybe there's a role for an institution, and then financial regulation regime might change also. But if we only, and the role of distribution of public banking, policies like what you have already done in Brazil, like the Porta Familia and things like that, become important for this kind of provision for executives, which solve part of this problem of the distribution. But I was kind of curious with hearing a little bit more about your thoughts on finance and its potential as entering this big picture. And for that, I have like two questions basically. So the first question is, are we measuring the right thing? Is risk what should be measured even inside of the financial system? Because if we think of living well within planetary boundaries, then we need to measure the industrial system, the efficiency of the system, but also the productivity, so that it needs for the basic needs, but also the footprint of these things, which ecological economics as a field has been doing quite well, but can that be well integrated in the financial system, or then is it an institution that needs to be created? And the other question is this idea of producing less. I think you already said that there is like this kind of contradiction or paradox inside of the system. But yeah, can we convince a financial system or like to integrate enough, or is it the role like Gabriela gave her, or like a big green state or something else to kind of control the financial system, or can we trunk it somehow?
Yes, so many questions, so many things to think about. I think I agree with you. Just a correction, the Brazilian public system and Caixa Econômica Federal was quite important for income distribution, but it was a government policy. It wasn't resources from the bank. You see, and as you have disorganized our state for many years, when it started, the Bolsa Family started, there was just one institution that was able to reach even part of the country, it was Caixa Econômica Federal. And that was really going to be privatized, and by some luck at the end of the 90s, it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen because the government was changing. So just to, but that's also a point of public banks. They also, they can be, when we defend that, from being defended that, they should be arms of finance policy, see, and I would just going a little to, not a little, but margin to André, I wouldn't put finance policy just with monetary policy and fiscal policy and exchange rate policy. You see, that's, and these are arms of finance policy. These are arms of social policy. So the role to be played by this system is much more than its role of being banked. And also we have this system, mainly Caixa Econômica Federal, that promoted an important movement of bancarization of people. So see, that's a role. But I think I totally agree with you. And I was trying to use this figure when I was talking about Basel. The huge ship in the ocean. It's this type of regulation. You see, regulation has been attached to risk since we think on these terms, especially from the 30s after or during the Great Depression, having the US model as a model. But it's a big ship, and it keeps going. You see, I think you have a quite important one. The idea that the solutions that are proposed, that we have included, is keeping the ship. That's the language that the system knows, and there is not a break on this. You see, that's keeping the system, and how can we manage to incorporate all this. So I totally agree. That's. But out of this, you just touched at some point that it's in my mind all the time. We were very critical, for example, about Basel, and then as we are very critical about the inflation target regimes, Andrea just talked. And once I made this question for them, if you take the system out, what people put into this place, there is not one only answer. As inflation is a multi-factors phenomenon, as it really showed us in this presentation, you have to have different approach. There's not this one size fits all and you have to resolve. And that's what these people expect. So, and that was my wondering about Basel also. If you take out Basel, what do you put into this place? That's a new book. We even, as Simone and I went to Minsky to try to figure it out, which would be the other answers, different answers to this problem of instability that's endogenous to the financial system. And so that would be a quite different object. And then can be a problem to keep this, but it's quite difficult to just afundar, how can I say that? Sink the system and create another one on this moment. So it's, but I totally agree with that. And I would have to think a little more how to include the idea of this income distribution into the system. But what I would say for first that you have to have, you see, again, the private market has its importance, you see. But going back to Keynes, if you leave it alone, you have just big problems. So not defending the system, but that is what we have. And we have to do what is possible and in a very active way to make it work better. I think that yesterday Ferrari went to this point. You have to have, and that's quite clear, having in mind all the Keynes narrative, the socialization of investment. You have to have more. I think that one of the main important things on Keynes is the state is not just the one who makes fiscal policy, it's important, but it's the regulator, the one that organizes the system that's, so I think that we have big problems in our head if we think about our research to face this. Thank you.
The next
I think
question.
that's what Gary is.
Gary.
Yeah, thanks, I think your excellent lecture opens many doors and hope you continue to deepen work. Just a few observations. One was that the thing that is so important is that you highlight is the risks and the uncertainties associated with the projects. This was already highlighted, I think, by Rogerio. And I hadn't thought much about this before I came here this week. And your paper really opens that up. And it's so important. Of course, this is a topic dripping with uncertainty and its challenges. And of course, that then leads to risk. And I'm reading things in the financial press these days that basically says we have like the fundamentals and expectations explaining asset price variations. So these uncertainties are being categorized as expectational problems rather than the fact that in this area, they are due to the very uncertain basis of the technology being experimented with. Second observation is that the topic of ESG is being beaten up every day in the business press. And there's a real danger that this will be seen as a kind of stupid game. And so that's something. Another comment is, folk were talking about private banks, and I think we have to pay attention to the structure of Brazilian banking. It is true, as you mentioned, private banks don't like to take risks, they don't make many loans, and they sometimes arrange loans, but they're not very involved in those, the big private banks. And there's a hole in who finances what in this country. In the US, where I spent years working, we had, even now, there are 6,000 commercial banks, even after years.
6,000, yes.
So it's very common to have like small business-oriented banks even in many cities. And those small banks are always troubled by, they need to compete for funds and then need to find investment targets that are viable. If these types of institutions were supported with some basis for taking these risks, they could be a kind of experimental test tube for trying out new technologies. Now, in this country, we don't have that, which takes us to the public bank. And could it be that BNDES, could be repurposed in part, especially since we have the uncertain status of some of the formerly public companies, as a laboratory for supporting these kinds of efforts, which would mean getting more involved, long-time debate about SMEs inside the BNDES, but maybe that's a direction that would be good for them. And of course, the other thing that goes to the uncertainties and all that you said about the problems of prudential regulation is just seen in this one thing, but actually that links to risk, and how are the banks going to be able to evaluate? They need to work carefully and closely with the environmental authorities. And of course, the Bolsonaro regime shows us how that can be corrupted just like the BNDES can be corrupted. So we have to win this democratic victory and push. Final thought is that actually you're talking about post-capitalists, and there's some sort of semi-okay but not very good books about post-capitalism. Part of that is to have a multi-dimensional approach to value. How to do that is a big question we've been thinking about at least. But then another thought is that couldn't there be a fund supported by, let's say, BIS or by some of the big players that would be available to support small banking institutions or the public banks to support small local experiments in localized technology generation that's aimed at sustainability? There's a lot of things that would be like big bang changes, like think of the old days, we built big dams. We're not going to build big dams anymore. But if we could set up a situation where people in local communities using local materials could do experiments and have them funded so they can try things out, and then learning by doing, and as Guttmann said, sharing technology, we can sort of make that transition, but recruit many, many people. I know you were at UFRJ, they have a kind of wonderful social technology component of the link to the civil engineering, the engineering school there. And that kind of collaboration between urban groups, economics, and engineering aimed at working with people with available technologies that people, even in favelas and in small towns, could access. That seems like that's got to be a big push, and there Brazil could be a global leader.
I totally agree with all your points. You see, this distance between uncertainty and risks are quite important to us. And we know that at the moments uncertainty is always important. There are moments where it gains strength, and we are living this moment. You see, again, quoting Guttmann, he thinks that we have to make this effort to transform uncertainty to risks. That's one of the main goals. I can't. My head's not organized on this, but you could think a little about this. These are ESGs, whatever you see, and in general, I'm not quite interested on this. I think that's. Yeah. But you see, again, Guttmann thinks that's a way, and so I was wondering, it may be a way, having in mind all this effort, having in mind the risk discussion, to integrate, to incorporate this idea of sustainability into corporations, banks, in order to be able to stimulate situation and also be able to measure. So I'm going to start to look with a little more care about it, but ESG is all the time in the business. I totally agree. I totally agree with this idea of using. I think that what we had in mind also is not just the this institutionality that there are in the US with too many small banks. And I think that's, you see, we know that from the films, every film you see, we used to see a small bank and the mortgage and also the funding for college. We see that all the time. But yes, I think that you have also in mind the community banks. I think that's the solution is local. The solution is to stimulate the local. The way, as Clara and Luis were talking about, we have to change the way that production goes. You see, it's quite important. And this type of initiative would go well. I even would say that not having in mind is facing the climate change, but we have very important programs as the microcredit, the programa, the Crédito Amigo, that's made by the Bank of BNDES, the Bank of the Northeastern. That's quite important program that goes to the community, but it's not for stimulate this type of decisions. You see, but we could go further. The point is, I think we have institutionality for this. I think we have capillarity for this. You have to have a bigger solution in this case that goes further beyond the problem of the banks, but a part of the policy, the economic policy and the social policy. I would totally agree. And this discussion of corruption and governance is quite important. Because also I think that you touched a very important point, and I will stop. I think that and that we have it went away. Yes. But I think that thank you for our comments. Sorry, so sorry for that.